when you're alone with me. I feel it coming.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this edition of Black History Month in Their Words. I'm Stephen Henderson, a local journalist here in Detroit of public radio, public television, and lots of other spaces where you can find me around town. And I've got two really great guests here for our panel. I'm really excited for the conversation that we're going to have. Warren Evans is a former Detroit police officer, former chief of police here in Detroit, and a former Wayne County sheriff. He is, of course, now the executive for Wayne County. Warren Evans, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate being here.
Yeah. And we've got a really special guest with us from all the way out in California. Willie Brown served more than 30 years in the California State Assembly, several of those years as its speaker. And more famously, perhaps, he was the mayor of San Francisco. Mayor Willie Brown, welcome to the program as well.
Stephen, thank you very much for having me. And I'm in particular pleased that I'm hanging out with a guy who's a cop. I don't get much chance to do that.
Well, around town in Detroit, we get to see Warren a lot. So, Mayor Brown,
Evolution.
Yeah, that's right. Mayor Brown, I'm going to start with you. You've been in politics and political elected office a really long time, and have seen, I would imagine, lots of things change dramatically. One of those things, of course, is the situation for Black people in this country, but also for Black elected officials. We're in a really different space now than we even were 15 or 20 years ago. And I'd love to have you talk about up front what you think the challenges are for Black elected officials today, things that we still face, that we used to face, but also things that are new and different than when you started in politics.
Well, we are now at the stage of no more first time in jet or the first time in ebony, designating us as being one of the first or the first. We really are at a point now where our community, both the Black community and the other communities, must expect from us the kind of changes that need to be made to ultimately stamp out years and years and years of what racism has produced in this country. And believe me, just elected me or Warren or any other person to public office has not automatically caused that to occur. We now have the awesome responsibility to see if we can't, on a day-by-day basis, a month-by-month basis, a year-by-year basis, see whether or not institutional changes are taking place, and are we having the impact that our community needs us to have on those institutional changes. And believe me, the Black Lives Matter movement prompts us to, in fact, be obligated to do exactly that.
So when you think of Black elected officials now, Mayor Brown, do you see them having that impact? And of course, it's a really important question to ask now, as we've just inaugurated the first African American and Asian American woman to be the vice president of the United States. We're still only 5 years away from the end of the first African American presidency. Have we reached a point where Black elected officials can have the impact that they're supposed to have on our lives?
Well, we've gotten the jobs, but the jobs do not automatically come with the power that will make institutional changes, because institutional changes has to also come from the minds and the psychic of our colleagues in the electoral business, and then ultimately from the population, which gave us the opportunity to have the titles. And it is really challenging to attempt to achieve that goal. Years ago, when I was first elected Speaker of the House in California, one of the things that came to our attention obviously was Nelson Mandela's continuous incarceration in South Africa continued to be the symbol of what is really wrong with things. We set about to try to have an impact and to change that. And we did. We were the first state to say no more investing of public dollars in any institution doing business in South Africa and perpetuating that system. Maxine Waters, now a congressperson that heads the committee that deals with the financial services of our nation, was the author of that measure. That translated into other places, other cities, other counties, other states, other pension funds, and then ultimately the world. And Nelson Mandela was freed. South Africa became a place where institutional changes are being made at that time, begin to be made, and now evidencing themselves. That's the kind of impact of which I speak. And we don't yet have that really here in America. In places like Atlanta, Georgia, where there are obviously long history of people starting back with Maynard Jackson and leading up to the current person who holds the mayorship, the whole business of translating that into an impact. And believe me, the election of the first Black U.S. Senator from Georgia is a reflection of that. His performance ultimately in the Senate, providing he is reelected next time around, all of that will represent something that's unusually special because it may mean a governorship. And if it does mean a governorship, then all the things that Black Lives Matter talks about, all the things that we have been debating all across the country with as a result of George Floyd's death and all the other people who've been similarly harmed and similarly killed in some places, that will be the kind of impact of which I speak if next time we hold this session, we're discussing those changes.
Yeah. Warren, you and I had a conversation just last week about the kinds of disparities that still haunt people of color in our country. And we were talking about vaccine distribution here in the state of Michigan, and the way that Wayne County, which is a much more urban county than its suburban neighbors, has larger populations of Black and Latino, other ethnic minorities, is not getting as much of the vaccine to distribute as other places. You know, it's a reminder, it's an important reminder, I think, of how much there still is to do, that however far we've come in terms of representation, in terms of changing systems of inequality, it still plays out in people's lives every day.
Absolutely it does. And to me, really every day I get up, I have to reinforce with myself that we're not counting firsts anymore, as the mayor said. I mean, we've had firsts a bunch of places, first person to do this, first. The issue is the effectiveness with which you carry out those duties, and the challenge of making equal access and equal opportunities something real rather than just what my mother would have called chin music. We're not just talking about it. You got to try to make it happen. And it doesn't happen because you send an email or a memo to your staff and people. It's something you have to bird dog on a regular basis, and you really have to build a culture. And so in many, many respects, we've had an awful lot of firsts, but I'm not so sure that in many cases, the agenda for people of color has moved in the right direction, certainly not far enough in the right direction. So it's a daily challenge. I mean, I'm one of those people who was born to be on the executive side. didn't have legislative experience, but I had an awful lot of executive experience. And, it's easy to get into managing your agency, but if you manage your agency without a vision for what the world should look like outside of your agency, you just manage it. And, you, you're not bringing into the perspective those issues that are critically important for people of color and others. Equity is a difficult thing in this country, and looking at the state of the country now in terms of its division, the ability to pull folks together to get anything done, to me, is more difficult than it was in the past. Not necessarily because people have changed; they're just more flagrant and belligerent with talking about the things that their heart tells them anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also curious, Warren, about your take on the policing issues that have been raised for a really long time, of course, in this country, but I feel like they are more in front of our faces these days because of the prevalence of cell phones and our ability to see into the world of police far more frequently. And of course, what we're seeing is horrifying in a lot of cases. George Floyd, his death last year was just one example of that. You spent a lot of time of your career in law enforcement. Talk about the trouble we still have with policing and why we can't make progress there the way we would like to.
Because the attitudes are prevalent, and there's a significant idea that this paramilitary thing is more important than the social aspects of what it is you get paid to do. I mean, 40 years ago, I spent time in the garages of police stations actually fighting with other officers to keep them from abusing prisoners of color. I mean, that's 40 years ago. I don't necessarily know that attitudes are worse now. They sure aren't a heck of a lot better. And as you said, but for cell phones and videos, we wouldn't be documenting, atrocities that happen very, very regularly. And even with the videos, it seems very difficult for some folks to see justice in the video. And so, yeah, there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done there. And, my approach is always was always a hands-on approach, and people would laugh at me and say, after you get to be chief of police, why are you out in the street every night? Why don't you go home at 4:00? The reason I don't go home at 4:00 is I want people to know that they might run into me at any time. And if they might run into me at any time, their conduct needs to be such that they're not ashamed to run into me at any time. And I'll take whatever action needs to occur. So it wasn't about cowboys and Indians. It's about performance, too. Police chiefs historically argue, anytime there's pressure, I need 200 more people. Well, if the 2,000 people you have are working at 60% capacity instead of 40% capacity, you got your 200 people. It's how you manage and how solid you are with your core values that have to translate down to other folks. And if they don't like it, you just find a different job. But those are going to be the core values.
It's important that we're having this conversation in February, which is Black History Month. A lot of people I hear say now it should be called American History Month because, number one, it's ridiculous to reduce an entire culture to 28 or 29 days during the year, but also because the history of African Americans in this country is American history. You can't really separate it out and treat it as though it's different. But I wonder what each of you thinks about the presence of Black History Month, which is now about 50 years old. It was President Gerald Ford who first suggested that we do this. What's the purpose of this now? Is it something we should still be doing? Mayor Brown, I'll start with you.
I do definitely believe that we should still be doing, and we should still be doing it because there's no replacement for it during the course of the other 11 months. We are still at the point where I grew up in Texas, raised and graduated from high school in Texas. At that time, we had three histories. We had what we called world history. We then had U.S. history. And then we had Texas history. Not on any of those stages was there ever an emphasis and an accurate report and an accurate accounting of where people of color would fit in each one of those. If they had, in fact, included Black history and it had been universally accepted the same way across the nation, then the question of whether or not there ought to be a particular month, that would be changed. So what would you highlight from the history books with reference to the people whom you're referring to? We need Black history, and we need Black History Month to give the whole world a demonstration of who we are, how we've been treated, what has been done to us, and what we have achieved, and where the next steps must be for us to get to the point where the world becomes as conscious of our existence as otherwise. Believe me, I would like not to have to do that, but it is a reality. There just isn't enough about us that people know, and they won't know if they get it from the big pot rather than from the small pot.
Warren, your life here in Detroit is sort of an example of the power of Black history, the importance of Black history. Should we still celebrate that in the month of February?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the mayor, but I'll come at it from a different angle. It's sad that we still have to do it that way. Little kids of color going to school now are learning an abbreviated view of history, because Black history is American history, at least for the last 300 years and before. And so the fact that it's not learned anywhere else is a reason for it to still be here. But the real problem is that it's not learned anywhere else. And it's not just Black kids that need to learn it. The lack of respect quite often for people of color and the kind of the marginalization of people of color is because, quite frankly, a lot of folks have no clue as to what that contribution was. I mean, sounds kind of surprising to me because, I had an outside source of family Black history that was a part of my life from, but a lot of people don't and haven't had. And so I think that's important. The other thing is, oftentimes we talk about Black history more in terms of describing the atrocities that have occurred, terrible things that have happened, and not as much time spent on those valiant African Americans who, in spite of those things, accomplished tremendous things. I'm not saying don't talk about the ugly, but just remember, little Black kids can do anything in their minds if they see somebody else that's done it. And so don't minimize the ability to put out there the exemplary work that others have done to set that model and give him that perspective of Black history, and not, a lot of the stuff that you see this month, especially on social media. I mean, it's a race to tell you what atrocities you might not know about.
Right. Right. I want to.
Warren, let me say, I think Warren is right, and I think he'd probably agree with me. The history books that depict American history, that teaches us about American history, has never accurately included the aspects of how this nation was developed with Black people participating in that development. And those little Black kids have got to get the correct information someplace. As a little Black kid, every night at dinner, 6 or 7 o'clock or whatever time, we called it supper, by the way, in Texas. But at that time, it was clear. Stories were told to me and to my sisters and brothers. Highlights were given to me of who was doing what on the black side, references of materials that could be reviewed. Unfortunately, it was only my family that got that. The white families living around us didn't get it. And so they too need the Black History Month just in order to try to catch up about me, as I have been taught to catch up about them the other 11 months.
Amen.
So I want to talk a little about the dawn of the Biden administration in Washington. Of course, that includes another one of these firsts that we were talking about before. And I don't think there's any question in anybody's mind that things are going to look really different than they did just a few months ago when we had a very different administration. But I'd like for both of you to talk about what you think the upside is of this tremendous first that was achieved with the election in November, and what the measure of success will be for someone like Kamala Harris, who is now the Vice President of the United States, second highest attaining African American in our history in terms of politics. How do we know that we're continuously moving forward from the performance that we get from her? Mayor Brown, I'll start with you.
Well, I think, and I want to say this without a doubt, in America, Kamala Harris has the chance to become the first woman president and the second president of color in 4 to 8 years from now, if she continues in the progressive means and manner in which she has demonstrated her skills and her ability to lead. Let me roll backwards, though, to Obama's ascendancy to the presidency. I would suspect that the greatest number of Black voters turned out for that purpose. They equal that in an effort to get Biden the job that also gave Harris the job. To the extent that we participate in the process of electing people, we're going to be better off, because power in this democracy is in who gets elected, who controls it, and what they do with it once they have it.
Warren, level of, we depend incredibly on the federal government and its performance to deliver for people in places like Wayne County. What's, in your mind, the measure of success for someone like Kamala Harris, who has this great opportunity?
I think a couple of things, and let me just say first that I think, there are little girls all over the country, girls of color, but not just, that see her as that opportunity that I mentioned before. If you see it, you can be it, which I think is important. And I think the way the vice president carries herself, her manner, her previous work experiences and those things, it's always going to be a strong woman presence, an articulate woman presence. It's going to be all of those things that not only the position, warrants, but all those other side issues that make you kind of smile and say, yeah, go get them, girl. That sort of thing. And I think that's critically important. And I think people need to also understand, during the election, there was a lot of, when she was prosecutor and she was this and she was that. At some point in life, people got to figure out, when you get elected or appointed to do a job, that's what you do. If you were elected prosecutor, you prosecute. That's what the job is about. And typecasting. It always happens during elections, but I think I think the mayor is absolutely right. I think she's well positioned to do tremendous things, and I think she will also be highlighted because of the 50-50 split in the Senate. At least for now, she will be a tie-breaking vote, which will be significant. It'll give her a platform to let America know why the vote is what it is.
Yeah. What do we need on the local level? here in Wayne County out of a Biden administration?
Well, I mean, revenue, but the revenue needs to be targeted to specific things. Yeah, right. The biggest issue to me in Wayne County that affects people of color and probably the ability of this region to improve and grow is transit. And, you know, I would be a strong advocate for some of the fundamental infrastructure funding to be able to start to do that. I mean, if you look around the country, you know, you don't form real transit on the backs of taxpayers locally. You need a lot of infrastructure work, infrastructure money, and the ability to do that is, in my mind, one of the biggest things that will impact poverty, will impact, there are people in Detroit, and I'm sure many places, that live in a neighborhood, and that's their world. They don't get outside of that world. There's nothing that they know outside of that world. They don't get the medical care they should because they don't have the ways to get there. I mean, there are all kinds of studies that say poor folks go to a doctor within 3 miles of their house so they can get there. If the doctor picks up and moves, he just picks up and moves. You go to the next guy that's within 3 miles of your house. I mean, you got people with medical records that look like, the encyclopedia. It's not a good way to do things. And for that, a number of reasons, I think it's really transit would be my main issue. There's certainly a lot of other issues. And I just thank God that we have an administration that appears to understand that understands those basic needs. Everybody's needs can't be met to the extent that they want them met. But it sure makes me feel a lot better to know that the heart's there. And at some point, the dollars will be there as best they can to help this region.
Okay. Mayor Willie Brown of San Francisco, it's really great to have you here with us in Detroit. I'm sure you're glad that you're here virtually and not here physically dealing with the snow and the cold that we're suffering through, but it's really great to have you here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And
Warren,
Warren
good
Evans.
No problem. Great to talk to you. Great to talk to you, Mayor. And thanks, Stephen. I appreciate the questions and I appreciate the dialogue.
Yeah. Okay. And thanks to everyone for joining.